This is gonna be a wine, not a tea video, and I swear this is my last one on the topic. I can't help it, but the Canadian press just can't help themselves either, seemingly, as yet again, just this week, there has been an announcement of new graves discovered and mass outrage along with it. Hey guys, it's me, the Canadian press. Let's massively distort historical discoveries to distract from our current political narratives not falling into line. Beep beep. Now, when you see this headline and picture, what do you think? Well, based on the picture of children shown and the 93 possible burials headline, you probably assume there's been Indigenous children's graves found again. That would not be an unreasonable assumption based on past reports and the entire article just saying there are possible burials by a residential school and listing ways that kids died at residential schools, which I have no qualms with. There is nothing wrong with confronting historical tragedies. That is important work that should be done. There is something very wrong, however, with not once mentioning in this article that the potential GPR anomalies found were not just randomly found at a residential school, but instead at a historic cemetery, with 43 of them having already been correlated with said cemetery and records. An unsurprising piece of information considering unmarked sections of historic cemeteries are common across both Canada and the world due to use of wooden and deteriorating markers. I, of course, made a point of noting this to Global News on Twitter, and within 3 minutes of my doing so, they locked replies on their tweet. And mere minutes after that, they also went and locked replies on their Facebook post, citing that people may be triggered by upsetting comments. You didn't lock them initially until I corrected you. So no, Global, no one is going to be triggered by being informed of the actual facts of the story, which is supposed to be your job. And the only way we are going to be able to escape this loop of misinformation from the press and being turned against each other by them is through unrelenting skepticism of everything they say and unrelenting correction whenever we see false narratives like this spread. And what better way to do that than to give people a better understanding of the wild origins of where this mass grave story began. Because despite popular belief, it did not start in 2021. The mass grave story has been around for many, many years and has ties not only to the Satanic Panic, but massive conspiracies about the Queen of England kidnapping children from Kamloops, invented criminal commissions and bodies, and famous unhinged activists. There is a lot to unpack here, so grab your tea and cozy in, or whatever else you're drinking. And before we start, a huge thank you to the sponsor of this channel, Noble Gold. It's a new year, and not much has changed. Houses are selling in a week, interest rates are at zero, our government is still borrowing money, printing money, 5 trillion in new money to be exact. What could possibly go wrong here? Meanwhile, consumer confidence hit a 10-year low, inflation hit 6.8%, with parts of the US seeing rates as high as 8%. Something is just not adding up. So what can you do? You can play it safe. Putting some of your assets into precious metals will keep your money away from the volatility of the markets and inflation and let you sleep at night. This month, Noble Gold is giving away a free solid gold American Eagle coin with any qualifying plan you start. So talk to an expert at Noble Gold today, and they'll run you through the options for keeping your money safe. You can call them at 877-646-5347 or visit their website at noblegoldinvestments.com. All right, so let's begin with a brief unpacking of all of the alleged mass grave sites in Canada so far and the actual information we have on them. Firstly, Cupar Island. When this whole story blew up last year, they came out and stated they had a confirmation of 160 plus undocumented graves. The media asked them for comments and interviews. They did not respond. They didn't give any further details, in fact. They didn't say how the graves were found, whether they were children's remains, or whether GPR was used. Nothing. Literally just said they found 160 bodies in an email and then zero elaboration. So that's that site. Cranbrook, BC, 182 graves. Media had to be corrected by Chief Sophie Pierre, who stated this was a normal graveyard. Maryville, 751 graves. Also just a cemetery built 13 years before the residential school existed. The new site at Williams Lake, also the grounds of a graveyard. Half the GPR anomalies are associated with said graveyard, and the rest are unconfirmed anomalies. Kamloops, also unknown, no excavation has been done. So how the hell did we come up with the narrative of mass graves off so little information? Well, before we open that can of worms, I need to quickly explain a concept a lot of people just don't understand for whatever reason. I believe the Indigenous community in Canada have been sorely mistreated. I also think it has been a disgusting step backwards to use their trauma for political purposes and rope the Indigenous community into unconfirmed narratives for politics and clicks. You can reject unconfirmed allegations about residential schools while still accepting the confirmed information. So it was really upsetting for me to see the other week the CBC recently do a small documentary, I suppose, on the graves in Kamloops and have heart-wrenching, totally confirmed stories about Indigenous children being torn from their families, and then put it beside complete rumors that Catholic priests were throwing babies into the incinerator below the school in Kamloops.
What happened to those babies?
For years, the answer to that was also whispered. But now the whispers were being spoken out loud.
What did he say happened in the furnace room?
He said he put babies in there.
Do you believe the stories that say that they put babies in the incinerator?
Yeah.
Yes, the CBC actually did that. With, of course, the comments turned off so no one could ask, do you have any evidence for any of this? It is an embarrassing journalistic failure, especially considering the Kamloops Residential School has been the site of mass exaggerations and conspiracy theories that have humiliated the Indigenous community for years before this, some of which are resurfacing in the media today with nobody knowing their origin. Which brings me to, where the hell did the story of mass graves come from when no mass graves have been discovered? Well, the mass graves claim has been being made for a long time in Canada by Indigenous activists. And by Indigenous activists, I of course mean a white person who has decided to become an activist for a community they don't belong to and inexplicably make everything worse for them in the process. Meet Kevin Annett.
Hello, this is Kevin Annett, Eagle Strong Voice. It's January the 8th, 2022. The Vatican Assassination Bureau, known as Santa Alianza, or the so-called Holy Alliance, has essentially put out a contract on me that I will die on or before February 21st, 22nd, which is a high point in the Ninth Circle Satanic Sacrificial Ritual Network operating out of Rome. We have that as solid proof.
Good old Kevin and I were supposed to do a panel together at University of British Columbia a few months back on Indigenous issues, and after many months of arrangements and a full agreement and acknowledgement of my participating on the panel with him, mere days before the event was taking place, he called the university, reported the club that invited us, and then stated he would call the police on the university if the event was not cancelled for violent speech or something. Why would a full-grown man be so terrified of speaking to a girl half his age, you may wonder? Well, if I had to guess, I think he was counting on me not having dug a bit deeper into the issues he's so passionate about, and after a quick Google search of my name a few days before he was supposed to speak to me, realized I probably knew a bit more about the issues than he was comfortable with. So who is this guy? Well, for over a decade now, Kevin Annett has been claiming there are mass graves from a physical genocide of Indigenous people across Canada, essentially as a full-time job. While the Government Truth and Reconciliation Commission found around 3,000 children died at residential schools of various causes, primarily tuberculosis and influenza, Annett makes the astounding claim in his 2006 film Unrepentant that 50,000 Canadian children were murdered by the church and at Indian residential schools. You can even find articles about him in the Globe and Mail from 2008 featuring headlines such as, "Clergyman has no evidence of mass graves." While this remains true, I imagine he is tickled pink with the misinformation being spread lately. Maybe next year the mainstream media will be even more desperate and willing to ruin the reputations of Indigenous Canadians by publishing the rest of Annett's bizarre theories about our history, which include Queen Elizabeth, her damned self, kidnapping 10 children from the Kamloops residential school, This claim, started by Annette back in 2008, actually went viral the last 2 years, with people sharing it all over Facebook, as it asserted the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State found Queen Elizabeth guilty of kidnapping Indigenous children after being issued an arrest order by the International Common Law Court of Justice in Brussels. Pretty shocking information. So shocking that even the media, who do love a good exaggeration, were forced to correct the record. I do adore this quote from Reuters, which reads, "The International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State and International Common Law Court of Justice are not legally recognized governing bodies. Both seem to be inventions of Kevin Annett, a former pastor who was removed from his ministry in 1997 for spreading conspiracy theories." And you know, I never just take the media at their word. I kept digging to find if these legal bodies actually existed. But the only other reference to them I could find was on Rational Wiki, which reads, "The International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State, or ITCCS, is a one-man blog that pretends to be a tribunal established to enforce common law. Kevin D. Annett, born 1956, a Canadian, is the founder and operator of a series of crank one-man blogs and phony organizations, the most famous among these being the above-mentioned judicial quagmire." So, the governing bodies that allegedly arrested and charged Queen Elizabeth for crimes against Indigenous people in Kamloops, the site which started this whole mass grave story, were one-man blogs run by Kevin Annett. You would think that would be an important detail to people, but it didn't seem to matter, as there are videos with hundreds of thousands of views spreading the Queen and the Kamloops kidnapping of 1964.
The day the Queen got to the school, I was part of a group of kids that went on a picnic with her and her husband and some of the priests. We went down to a meadow near Dead Man's Creek. I remember it was weird because we all had to bend down and kiss her foot, and she was wearing a white lace boot. After a while, I saw the Queen and her husband leave the picnic with 10 children from the school, and those kids never returned. They took away those 10 kids and nobody ever saw them again.
And not only that, Annett had an actual attendee of the Kamloops school named William Combs write a signed letter stating that this happened. You can find articles about these statements in the Daily Cost from 2010. Where Combs wrote that when he was a child, he saw a priest burying another child in the school orchard one night, and that in September 1964, when he was 12 years old, his school was visited by the Queen of England, and that her and Philip took 10 children on a picnic, and they were never returned to the school. So essentially, kidnapping by the royal family. Now, far be it from me to defend elites, but in this case, there is just literally no evidence. The only information about the Queen visiting Canada in 1964 shows that she simply never visited Western Canada during that trip. She didn't even step foot anywhere in the entire province of BC where Kamloops is located on said trip. And once again, Annett, who famously invents legal bodies and conspiracies, was the main advocate for pushing and publishing this residential school survivor's stories about the Queen and about the mass graves being around the school. Now, remember when I mentioned the Satanic panic? Well, Annett was a pastor in the 90s and seemingly became obsessed with stories of satanic ritual abuse, to the point where he basically started writing his own fanfics about it and published them as though they were legitimate articles from his said judicial quagmires. Annett's legal bodies have held entire fake trials for European royals stripping children naked and hunting them down, in which he wrote on one of his many defunct blogs, "Teens were drugged, stripped naked, raped, hunted down in the woods, and killed by European royals," according to this week's latest eyewitness to testify before the International Common Law Court of Justice in Brussels. The woman was the fourth eyewitness to give accounts about these human hunting parties of the global elite Ninth Circle Satanic Child Sacrifice Cult Network. A former member of the Netherlands criminal drug syndicate known as Octopus testified that victims were obtained for these human hunting parties from juvenile detention centers in Belgium and Holland. His blogs even detailed the witness testimonies from court, which stated, "In 2004, I was an involuntary witness to torture, rape, and murder sessions of drugged children performed for a group of high-ranked people in the Netherlands," stated a woman. Now, we know the Epstein types have gotten up to some weird stuff, but the only problem with these courts and these allegations and testimonies is every single organization and witness here is just a fabrication of Kevin Annette's mind.
She's the fourth one to come forward. A public servant, I won't say in what capacity, because we're protecting this witness.
The man is obsessed with child satanic sacrifice, mass graves, torture, rape, and alleging he is the only one with all of this extremely shocking information about it, that for some reason no other organization or individuals have, and for some reason only gets leaked from a legal body that only exists on a site he runs. Now, Annette has spent most of his life going around to Indigenous communities trying to start a sovereign nation separate from Canada, telling them a mass physical genocide occurred here in Canada. You guys were systematically killed by the church and government, inventing stories like this one by the Queen, and even garnering a mass following of those who read his books and watch his videos. You can find academic journals that even reference Annette visiting reserves across Canada to screen his film about the 50,000 kids being murdered and put in mass graves. Thank goodness many have rejected him, saying that he is an embarrassment for the Indigenous people. But it does terrify me to an extent when I hear the mainstream media, before any exhumation is conducted, stating Kevin Annette has been vindicated. That happened. It was one of the first articles to come out with this whole mass grave story in July last year. It does terrify me for the Indigenous community to see the CBC publishing accounts of how a friend of a friend told an Indigenous community member from Kamloops that there was someone being buried in the apple orchard, or that there were rumors of babies being thrown into a furnace, both claims that seemingly started from Kevin Annette. You'll notice in many of these interviews, no one is a direct eyewitness to the very exaggerated claims that don't exist within the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that have been made. They have all heard it from someone, which I don't actually doubt is true, but we also know for a fact that Kevin Annette has spent the last decade writing books, publishing his movies, and spending time at residential schools with survivors and on reserves trying to get them on board with the bizarre stories he tells, and even succeeding at times. And this is what is so terrifying in general about spreading misinformation like what Annette does. There is a possibility that I do not deny that there are kids buried in the apple orchard. We simply do not know. There has not been a proper investigation. But when the eyewitness to that went to the school has also joined Annette in claiming that the Queen kidnapped a bunch of children when she wasn't even in the area, makes me a bit doubtful. The more the media share false stories, exaggerated stories, claims about mass graves that end up just being graveyards, as they have for the majority of these cases, or God forbid, spread stories started by people like Annette, the less people are going to believe those telling real stories. Let me be absolutely clear. Real crises do not need conspiracies to prove their importance, and to disprove a false conspiracy is not to attack the underlying crisis. No one but a moral idiot would dispute that the mistreatment of Canada's Indigenous population was an atrocity, but citing individuals like Kevin Annette on this issue, or citing people who act like Annette and make wild claims before or without any proof, make the problem more invisible by virtue of their sheer insanity, which is actually why I think it is so damn important that we vet these stories before sharing them, that we ensure what is being said is true, because people like the mainstream media who like to claim, I believe no graves existed or no atrocities occurred at residential schools because I doubt the official narrative they've put out, and people like Kevin Annette inventing entire international legal bodies to spread conspiracies, they rely on the fact that there's a good chance you won't dig deeper. Digging deeper being something we as Canadians need to do on both a metaphorical and a real physical level before ever talking about this issue again. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Like I said, I say this is going to be my last video on the subject, but who am I kidding? I don't doubt the media will bring it up again, but I appreciate you all watching. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. It was a wild ride researching, and I reckon there is a lot more to be found. I will see you all next time.